One of the important things to understand in DPDI is that what it does, it amends the whole data protection framework in the UK.
We are surrounded by digital now, so physical actually is a welcome change.
There's no intent in this legislation to reduce the protections for individuals in society.
Welcome to Paragon Sounds. I'm Gemma Mitchell, Managing Director of Paragon Customer Communications, Dagenham. And today I'm joined by Chris and Marc to talk about unlocking the opportunities, understanding the DPDI bill and its impact on direct marketing. So Chris, tell me a little bit about your involvement in the DPDI bill.
Sure. Well, the DPDI bill, the DMA, has worked on for more than 3 years, starting with consultations from our members that we held with officials from DCIT 3 years ago, and focused on the things that were really important to our industry, particularly achieving clarity on legitimate interests as a lawful basis, which we'll talk quite a bit about later on. More recently, over the past 18 months, I've chaired a business advisory group for Secretary of State Donnellan, which has included all of the major UK trade associations, such as Tech UK, UK Finance, CBI, Make UK, in which the final shape of the bill took place, that has now been presented to Parliament as the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill. And the important things about the bill is it intends to modernize UK's data protection framework using some of the freedoms in a post-Brexit environment to create improved growth and productivity and less bureaucratic paperwork in the UK economy that should liberate businesses to speak to their customers and potential customers in a better, easier way, and in that way improve productivity in the economy and growth for businesses in our sector.
Fantastic. And Marc, your involvement today on DPDI?
Well, as Strategy and Insight Director at Paragon, data's right at the heart of our business, and therefore it's my job to help inform our clients of the opportunities and the changes and make sure that we're keeping up to the legislation. Last time around with GDPR, I went on tour around the country giving lots of training sessions, and this time round I've been doing a few as well. And it's very important that we keep abreast of what's going on, because it's still not sort of fixed and firm yet. It's going through committee stage in the Lords, but it's really important that we understand the practical implications of the legislation. That's the key for us, and then how we can bring that into our own working practice within the organisation, but also help inform our clients about how they can use those, and as you mentioned, the opportunities that it brings.
And interestingly, you and I were chatting beforehand about, is DPDI really different from GDPR? So
yes and no. A lot of it, as Chris mentioned, is about clarity and making sure that things are aligned. Because last time around, PECA, which is a different set of regulations, was kind of not involved with this, and that's sort of more on the digital side. This brings that digital side and aligns it a bit more. It gives much more clarity over legitimate interests and the use of direct mail, which is absolutely key. There are changes to cookie pop-ups, which are going, again, we'll talk about later, which are going to be very, very important from a marketing point of view. So practical implications there that people need to understand, and understand how you can then train your staff to know the differences. So there are some differences, but a lot of it also is about alignment and clarity.
And Chris, is it different?
It is different, and what it particularly does, as Marc said, is it removes uncertainty around key issues. So one of the greatest uncertainties has been around lawful basis, which there are 6 in GDPR, and the most important for marketers and direct marketers are legitimate interest and consent. And in GDPR, those lawful bases are equal. There is no hierarchy at all. And we worked really hard within the EU with the support of the UK government to get a recital into GDPR that said direct marketing was a lawful basis, which we expected would lead to the certainty we need around that use case. And legitimate effectively is what traditionally we might have called opt-out in the industry, where you have the right to speak to your customers and your potential customers unless they tell you not to. And what has happened in the implementation of GDPR is that lawyers, data protection officers, and especially large corporates have taken a zero-risk approach and determined that they weren't sure how the ICO might interpret legitimate interests, even though we published legitimate interests for marketing as a whole document with a foreword from Liz Denham, the information commissioner, endorsing what we read, and with the ICO having reviewed everything in our guidance. Nevertheless, that risk-free approach that large brands in particular have taken has reduced the usage of third-party data for direct mail quite considerably because people have not wanted to take any risks, and it's therefore had a consequential impact on the use of direct mail as an acquisition channel, and also in some instances as a retention channel. And that's been to the detriment of our community and our members, not least producers like Paragon, but the Royal Mail has suffered huge hundreds of millions of pounds of reduction in advertising mail revenues as a result. And so that was the single most important issue to our members in dealing and addressing the opportunities that working with the government created. And I think we've achieved that because one of the things the legislation does is it moves that recital saying direct marketing may be a legitimate interest into main text GDPR under, don't want to get too technical for the audience, but it's Article 6.1(f) that specifies legitimate interest as a lawful basis, and direct marketing has been brought into main text as an example of what is a legitimate interest, along with two other examples that also existed in the recitals of GDPR. But the important thing for the country as a whole, if we go outside of direct marketing, is that those are illustrative examples only, and the default position to consent that has taken place across the country has affected everything from community groups trying to organize fundraisers on the village lawn to, in a very personal instance, my wife chairs our residents association, and members of the residents association were insistent you couldn't communicate to other residents without consent, which is, of course, not the case. The Residents Association is there to support the interests of the residents, and therefore it's of course a legitimate interest, except to those residents, and there are always some, who don't want to participate in the Residents Association and don't want to be involved with their neighbors, and of course they can opt out
Yeah.
in an appropriate way. So it has been a widely misunderstood piece of legislation across the whole economy and society, and the government absolutely has wanted to address that and give certainty to legitimate interests as a lawful basis across a wide range of use cases, but very importantly for our industry sector and for marketers.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about GDPR, it's very clear that there was a no risk approach, and that led to some significant risk-averse decisions being made. So we've talked quite lengthily there about the fundamental change in the clarification of legitimate interest, and that now being main text. Obviously, this is quite a complex and a very lengthy process and documentation, but what other are the key highlights and areas of change? And Marc, I know you've been heavily involved in this in other areas as well as legitimate interest, but what are the other key highlights and changes that we should be calling out?
So there's a big change on the cookies side of things. At the moment, when customers go to websites, they face these pop-ups that generally annoy people. So it really interferes with the efficiency and the effectiveness of the customer journey. They are there because people want to share third-party cookies, and therefore you want to turn those off as a customer, potentially. And then you go through various types of pop-ups. Some of them are better than others, and really people should be taking this opportunity to look again at how they do that. But more importantly, what the legislation is intending is that if you're only going to have first-party cookies, whereby it's going to help you make that website experience better for the customer, personalize that experience, allow them more activity there that is tailored to them, and you have no intention of using the third-party cookies or collecting anything for anything that's nothing to do with that website journey, then you won't have to have the pop-up, which means A, it's a much smoother journey for the customer, and B, this is really important, a lot of the traffic that is currently invisible because people are opting out will become visible. So you will have better data to understand where people are going on your site and where there's potential problems and where you can fix stuff and make the journey better for the customer. Because at the moment, large slabs are not visible, either because the cookies are completely turned off by the providers, or people are opting out of everything because they don't really understand which one's which, because you've got obviously the ones that are helping you get and navigate the site properly. But there's ones you can't turn off, obviously, but then there's others that people, particularly if they make it difficult, they have to keep going through and scrolling down, and it's a real pain for them. If you can make that easier for them and they don't have to, they'll get a better journey. And that will improve people's conversion through a site. So that's all good, and you'll have visibility.
Fantastic. And Chris, there's been some real change for the charity sector, as I understand it. So they were particularly heavily impacted in their acquisition strategies under GDPR. So what are the changes that our charity customers will be seeing?
Yeah, I think one of the important things to understand in DPDI is that what it does, it amends the whole data protection framework in the UK. And there are three really governing pieces of legislation in the UK. There's the Data Protection Act 2018, there's Privacy and Electronic Communications regulations, and there is the GDPR itself. And those three work together to create a framework. So DPDI makes amendments to all three with that purpose that I mentioned of creating a pro-growth environment with less bureaucratic restrictions and less onerous costs on business. And one of the restrictions in privacy and electronic communications regulation in terms of email marketing, which is an important fundraising channel, is that there was a soft opt-in available to commercial organizations that enabled you to communicate to your existing customers on an opt-out basis, which is normal, provided there was an unsubscribe link, which is the opt-out mechanism. And that opportunity, because of the way the legislation was written, and not particularly by intent, was not available to non-commercial organizations such as charities. And so what DPDI does is it specifically extends that soft opt-in for email marketing to charities and other non-commercial organizations so they can operate on an even playing field to commercial organizations. And we know how difficult it has been for charities to raise money in the COVID and post-COVID period, and also to communicate to their volunteers, by the way, not just their donors and their legacy donors and so on. And that's an important combination for fundraising between the email channel and the print channel because they work hand in hand in order to create the response rates and the donation volumes that are necessary. But we need to support, and the government recognizes, we need to support our third sector and not-for-profit community in these difficult times.
Fantastic. And are there any other key highlights that we should be talking about today or being aware of?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few, and they all sound perhaps technical, but cumulatively, they create real opportunities. So one of the opportunities on cost reductions for business and bureaucratic administration, especially for small businesses, and we were just talking about charities. The majority of charities are small businesses. The majority of our members in the agency sector are small businesses. Many mailing houses are small businesses. And what the legislation does is it exempts small businesses that are not conducting high-risk processing from the responsibilities of keeping records and having data protection officers and so on. So a whole level of administration. But obviously, if you're a small business whose business is the provision of third-party data, that no doubt will be considered high-risk processing under the definition. And obviously, the larger your customer base, the larger the risk is, and so on. But the intent is to take a whole chunk of administrative burdens away from small to medium-sized enterprises, especially where the processing will not create any risk to citizens. And I think that's really important for many, many businesses and goes alongside what Marc was mentioning, because in addition to the improvements to the customer journey of removing pop-up banners and the opportunities to collect insight and information about your existing customers, obviously the whole management of cookies and the cookie environment required in-house staff resources and sometimes external costs to privacy technology providers. And so that combination of reduced manpower burdens into reduced paperwork, reduced bureaucracy, that's again part of unleashing the growth in the UK economy.
But that is important that it is reduced. It's not completely done away with. And so, it's very important for marketers out there to recognise what has changed, what has reduced a little bit and it's less onerous, but what is still there and the ethical reasons behind what is still there and why you still need to make sure that you are keeping data safe, you are keeping data up to date, you are doing the right things. Legitimate interest does still need some kind of balancing. You need to work out the balancing assessment as to whether this is the right thing to be doing. And soft opt-in, similarly, is this relevant? Is this something that somebody would expect to get as a result of having an existing relationship with you? But if it's gone far too far off, sort of off-piste, so to speak, no, that wouldn't fall under soft opt-in. So again, it's very much about people understanding the changes, and some of them, as Chris says, very technical, but you've got to understand what that means from a practical point of view, and whether that means you're going to change some of your processes, some of your documentation, remove some of your documentation. But if you are dealing with sensitive data, and if you're dealing with lots of customer data, and that's high risk still. So you do need to have those things in place. So it's about understanding your data and revisiting. GDPR was a while back, and staff, there was lots of training, and there was lots of focus on it, and things have just sort of chugged along. I think this is an excellent opportunity for people to revisit. Is your privacy policy still appropriate? Do I want to change things because if you're a global organisation, for example, you've still got to have parity with the European legislation and adequacy, it's called. So you might go, well, actually, I'm not going to change anything, because if I change it there just in the UK, that's going to cost me, because I'm going to have two parallel systems running. So I might just keep it the way it's supposed to be. But if most of your customer base is in the UK, then this is an opportunity for you to revisit some of your processes and your training of your staff, and making sure everybody's up to date and understand the implications of. So, for example, going back to what Chris was talking about in terms of people cutting back on direct mail because they were so risk averse. When I literally stood on a stage giving a presentation in Ireland about GDPR, and a solicitor in the audience started telling me, no, you can't do direct mail under GDPR. Okay, yes, you can. And then I explained it again and again and again. But their sort of minds were closed because they were so risk averse. And what that meant is it cut out a really valuable quality channel in the marketing mix, because the power of the physical still has massive resonance and some of the stuff from Jigmail and stuff from my own personal experience. Young people love direct mail because they've kind of got digital fatigue, and post-COVID, we've all got digital fatigue. So getting something physical is absolutely brilliant. One of the best campaigns I ever did was actually for voting and targeted at 18-year-olds, and I got lampooned in the marketing press. Why are you doing direct mail to 18-year-olds? And it was a newspaper format, and it was, Gemma, the UK looks forward to your vote, in big headline across the bank. And youngsters would put it up in their bedrooms and share it with their friends. It was so exciting for them to get physical stuff that was personalised and individualised to them, and told them the stuff you want. And with the way you can use data now to make things so much more relevant for a customer, changing the messaging, changing the imagery, changing the copy, and focusing on what they want, to cut it out because of a risk aversion that really should never have been there was counterproductive, to be honest. And people have missed out on direct mail as a wonderful acquisition channel, but also as a channel that can be used in different parts of the journey as well. Renewals, for example, just because it's physical and tangible, and you can do so many things with it that break through, in effect, digital is great, and I'm not going to knock digital at all, but we are surrounded by digital now. So physical actually is a welcome change for a lot of people. So
there's a number of important points in what you were just saying, Mark, and I think, of course, the channel is important, and I chair Jigmail, so thank you so much for bringing up the amazing research and insight that Jigmail has done, which has shown the attentiveness level, the response rates, not just response rates, but the drive to commercial actions, both commercial actions online and commercial actions in the store. So happy to hear you promoting Jigmail. And the other important point is that there's no intent in this legislation to reduce the protections for individuals in society, which, as we go into an AI data-driven world across multiple industry sectors, everything from your healthcare to your driverless cars to so many applications, it's really important that the people of the country trust the technological evolution that's going underway. So while there's a rebalancing, it's important to note that the UK has been very careful not to diverge from a high level of protection for citizens, which is important to maintaining that adequacy with the EU. And the notion of proportionality is built into GDPR, and I think this is something that people have misunderstood. GDPR contains a recital 4, for instance, that says privacy is a fundamental right, not an absolute right, and must be balanced with other rights, such as the right to conduct a business. And you cannot have a right to conduct a business without the opportunity to attract and retain your existing customers, and nor can a charity have the right to exist as a charity without the opportunity to attract new donors and retain existing donors. So when we look at tying back to that legitimate interest clause clarification and the proportionality and balancing tests you mentioned, it's really important notion that the right to conduct a business exists in GDPR alongside and in equal proportion to the right to privacy. But of course, what you have to do if you're building trust in your customers for a long-term relationship, for lifetime value, which is what has always been at the heart of the direct marketing industry and where direct mail has always played an important role, is loyalty. And to build loyalty, your customers need to trust you. And part of what they think about when they're deciding whether to trust you in today's world is your approach to their data and that relevance that you create and whether it fits within their reasonable expectations. So that balancing test is not just important in terms of justifying why you would use legitimate interests. It's actually fundamentally important to make sure that your program is going to land on the right side of what your customers expect and build that trust that will keep them coming back year after year to buy from you.
How do we approach that, Mark? So, we talk about driving loyalty, and we've talked a lot about customer journey as well. So we talked about cookie consent improving user experience. If we're now saying, to coin a phrase and perhaps be a little bit crassy, and gloves are off, and we can definitely and with certainty use direct marketing as an acquisition tool, how do we make sure that we're not going back 20 years and sending the same mass message to millions of people? How do we drive that?
That's about being sophisticated in your data usage. So it's about understanding what's appropriate to use as well, because there is a danger with the amount of data we hold on people, with AI, with the ability to individualize things, that you make things so personal that it gets a bit big brothery and people, a bit creepy. And so just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And that goes back to that balancing assessment. What do people reasonably expect from an organization? I'll go back to I've been in direct marketing for a very long time, right? A very long time. And the watchwords were always timely, relevant, and motivating. A bit of a broken record on that. Timely, relevant, and motivating. So relevant is really important in that. And that's where the data comes in, because if you have data points that will improve the ability to make something relevant to your customer because it's about stuff that they are interested in and they're interested in, that's great. If you start sending them stuff that they're not interested in just off the, because you can, that's daft. So it's not actually in your interest as a business to send people things that are not timely, relevant, and motivating, because they won't respond and they won't convert. If you get it right because you're using the data sensibly, then you will. And you'll find that direct mail and door drops and inserts and all the physical media that people go, no, it's digital now, mate, it's digital. It's a bit more costly. Well, possibly, but if you actually look at the response quality and the conversion, and look at the proper cost and return on investment on those physical media, that's a different calculation. And then, as Chris mentioned, the lifetime value. So over time, you will see that those people are more likely to stay with you as well, because the physical channels tend, and I say I'm drawing on almost 40 years experience here, they tend to be better quality customers.
So it's interesting that we touched on Mail, and their research demonstrates that a physical communication drives better trust in brand. And their latest research is around attention, and that a physical piece of direct marketing generates 108 seconds. So back to your point, Mark, when we're looking at the historic analytics on ROI, and historically it's been CPA, cost per acquisition, we're now in the realms where it's cost per second. So yes, from a PAC point of view, direct mail might be perceived to be a more costly method of communication. But actually, when you understand the real metrics that are now available, it's actually an exceptionally competitive and commercially viable communication. So, with all of that said, Chris, how has the DMA's role changed or advanced with the introduction of DPDI?
Well, the DMA's role has really stayed the same in the sense that it has always been our primary function to ensure that the legislative framework is right for the industry to grow and thrive, and whether that is historically when the data-driven channels were just the first two, which were print and telephone, which came before the others, or today where everything are data-driven channels. It is our job to ensure that the legislative framework is right for the industry to succeed and thrive. It's our job to ensure the industry operates responsibly so that brands can build trust and brands can work with trusted suppliers. And I think that's really important, that brands are, under data protection legislation, responsible for the activities and actions of their supply chain. You need to work with trusted suppliers, hopefully those that are in DMA membership. But we produce the best practice guides for the industry. It's then important that practitioners in the industry have the skill sets to do things in the right way and understand the types of things you and Marc were just talking about, so they can make the right investment decisions for their channels. And that means having the right skills and staying active and involved. But, one of the points you were making, Gemma, was really interesting in terms of the physical interaction with print. And not just the 108 seconds, but the fact it stays in the household for up to 4 weeks. And I think that tangible investment in caring about your customer is really important. And then what we get is metrics for the mail channel that have never been available before, that apply to all other media channels in terms of reach and frequency. So now I can see that over that 4 weeks in the household, 1.3 or 1.4 people interacted with the brochure, not just the one person who might have received it, perhaps their spouse, their partner, their child, a visitor to the household. And that it might be 3, 4, 5 times over the course of the 4-week period that different people interact. And then that allows you to compare mail and add mail to media schedules and be evaluated and analyzed not just on the pure response rate and on the pure ROI, but the contribution overall to the brand's objectives in the campaign, which may have a qualitative aspect, an attitudinal aspect, as well as a response aspect. And when you add mail to a schedule alongside TV, digital channels, and whatever, you can see a real increase in effective frequency and a decrease in excessive frequency, which what it means is less waste. And when people feel bombarded, especially in the digital channels, by excessive frequency, they get really annoyed with the brand. It undermines brand trust, and it causes people to opt out of the relationship with the brand. So if you replace irritating people with an overinvestment in digital and balance it with some increased investment in print, so that you have less annoying frequency and more effective frequency. And then that goes back to what Marc was talking about, because what people don't want is over-familiar personalization. They don't want you just to say, hey, Marc, hey, Gemma, I've got an offer for you, and show that they know your first name. That's not relevance. Relevance is understanding what you bought, what you're likely to buy, so you can use the techniques of modern print production to have a slightly different version of your catalog to each customer based on their historic purchasing characteristics and attributes, so that when you're spending that time, those 108 seconds over 4 weeks, and looking at it with your mom when she comes over to the house to visit, and you're flipping through your catalog, it is relevant to you without necessarily being overly familiar to you, which is where you get that creepy factor. And with a lot of digital, where you have a bit of retargeting that looks like companies are following you around the internet. And as I say, and this is my example, and it'd be a bit silly, but if you go into, a cheese shop on the high street and don't choose to buy the street on the high street, and the next thing you know, you're going into a clothing shop, the staff member from the cheese shop doesn't follow you into the clothing shop and say, hey, here's the cheese you were looking at, you didn't buy it. No, and then your context and your environment is totally different, because once I'm in the clothing shop, I'm not thinking about a wonderfully flavorful, but perhaps a bit stinky French brie if I'm looking at, my underwear that I'm going to buy or something like that. So the experience of mail, doesn't have that creepy factor of following you, especially if you do it correctly. So you get the relevance without the intrusiveness and the over-familiarity that makes people feel creepy when a brand follows them in an intrusive way. And we just have to think of What are the behaviors you would expect in the real world if you're a brand? And going back to the traditional funnel, I need to introduce myself to you as a business in the right way, in a way that's respectful and engaging and enticing, before I indicate that I know everything about your life. And we used to have that journey that we focused on.
There's something, you touched on the materiality of mail, and it's a psychological trigger. So in effect, there's something about mail that is more trusting, and you feel that the company has taken time to communicate with you better. There's something sort of disposable about digital, from a psychological point of view, that is not there in the direct mail physical sort of piece. So that's kind of important depending on the message. So if you are trying to get a trust message across, it might be about financial matters or something like that, it's a very good medium to be talking about. If you're talking about things that are potentially upsetting for people, that might be a better one than, let's say, slightly more disposable digital approach. Partly because direct mails and any of the physical stuff like door drops and things, they're a bit more of a sit-back medium. You are consuming it as a reader, as opposed to a screen where you're sort of face forward and you're scrolling, and it's very, let's say, disposable, which is it's not a nice word, but it can be. And also on the attention side, most people are potentially looking at a couple of screens. They're looking at a TV screen and they're scrolling on their phones as well. You can't really do that with a bit of physical material, which is why you get that slightly more undivided attention and that 108 seconds, because you are literally paying attention to that media. You are not doing other stuff because you can't do other stuff. So that split screen kind of impact, which is dividing people's attention, isn't there. So that's a really good thing to think about. And going back to, the sort of messages to people is about revisit your marketing mix. Think about what are the messages you're trying to get across. If you've taken direct mail out of the mix, come back in, test it again. Look at where the stages it would be good, whether that's acquisition or retention or awareness, because you could actually be out there with awareness in the mix now for direct mail because of this sort of amount of seconds that people are doing, which is quite significant in comparison with literally, what is it for videos on Facebook now? If it's any more than 15 seconds, you haven't got a hope in hell of being looked at. So it can be like 3 seconds. People on YouTube, 4 seconds. I'm not waiting for this ad at all. I'm not, and I'm gone. Having that undivided attention can be used really usefully for awareness. So go back, revisit the way you communicate with your customers.
So it's interesting that we then talk about the customer journey and the bridge between digital and physical.
If you look at the response to print, it takes you to the web. And that's great because you can build on the experience. So if you're a holiday travel company and you've teased a destination, maybe beautiful beaches in Southeast Asia, because that customer, tends to travel more widely, then when you bring them in to the digital experience on the website, you can use videos of hotels and beaches and whatever to convert the journey and bring people down, because people on a considered purchase, as opposed to fast-moving consumer goods purchase, on a considered purchase, it takes multiple touch points and multiple experiences within the journey to come to the decision on what to buy. And obviously, the more expensive the item, the more the consideration frame, so purchasing a car, for instance. But if I can attract you through a brochure into the car website, but in the website, you can personalize the experience. You can build your own car now. You can choose the color and you can choose the interior. You can do everything, and you can see all how it looks like before making that purchase decision.
And it's not even just to a website. You can use the physical as a bridge to the digital. QR code. We've been using it, for example, to launch a augmented reality experience, where you can have. A few years ago, I came up with. It was originally Bill Walker, because he would walk across a bill and explain the difficulties of the bill. I went away on holiday, and when I came back, he'd become Belinda Walker. But I think he's now Billy for Boots, one of our clients, where explains things about the process of getting an optician's appointment and stuff like that. So using the direct mail to launch and bridge to a digital experience, which can be entertaining, explanatory, or marketing orientated to get someone to purchase something, but all of those things. And it's not digital or physical. It's physical bridging to digital, which might then bridge back again, depending on what it is you're trying to get across. So these are all really important things to think about and revisit. And say with the charities, with the soft opt in now, they can now add some digital channel that had previously been sort of denied them very unfairly.
No, that's right. And I think, to pivot back to the bill itself, what the bill does is it gives clarity and certainty about how customers can engage with their customers. And then there are more tools in the industry, as we were talking about with Jigmail and the, advanced opportunities in print production technologies. Data-driven print production has changed hugely from the days where every household received the same pack. So if you look at the evolution of technology, the evolution of legislation, it enables brands in a thoughtful, considered way with insight and data to make the right decisions and to spend their marketing spend in the most effective combination of channels. And I think that's what we work hard at, because you were asking the role of the DMA. We work hard to create those opportunities and to share the insight that might be helpful. And fundamentally, that's important. But that's why these evolutions to the legislation, where each thing on its own doesn't sound hugely transformational, when you add them all up, they make a big difference. And I'll just draw attention to one other, which is in the scope of the work of the Information Commissioner's Office, who's the regulator for the industry that we all worry about, because if you've done something wrong under GDPR, the ICO can fine you up to £17.5 million or up to 4% of global turnover. And that fining level has been now extended into privacy and electronic communications to the digital channels, including telephone. So there is a big stick. But the Information Commissioner in the new legislation is required to look, when they're making decisions, not just on privacy, but also on the effect of growth in the markets and the effects of competition in the markets. And that means, and again, it's not a big change, because we were talking before about Recital 4, that balance that's in GDPR. If the information only considers the impact on privacy, they're not considering the impact on the right to conduct a business. So the government's actually put it into the remit of the Information Commissioner's Office that they have to consider the impact on growth and the impact on innovation and the impact on competition when they're arriving at their conclusions on whether the law has been properly applied. And that's again, a technical tweak to the remit of the Information Commissioner, but one that's in keeping with all the other changes throughout the legislation.
And we've obviously concentrated on marketing, but there's stuff in the legislation that's about the good of society. There's stuff in there around data verification systems and putting a framework around that. There's stuff in there around sort of smart data schemes, where you're using data collected with permissions of people to come up with things that are innovations that will help and benefit society, maybe around medical advancements or disease prevention or open banking or whatever it is. It's something for the benefit of society using data the slightly scary term, big data, right? Everyone's scared. But if people are prepared to commit to that, there are frameworks in here in the legislation now that allow people to collect data that then gets used for studies that will help people, whether it's national security or betterment of society.
Absolutely, some big changes in the area of scientific research, especially in terms of using data from one study onwards into another study. So when you're finding cures for diseases, whether that be cancer or other diseases, what you learn in one study may not ultimately lead to the cure, but you build upon one study with the next study, and there's been lack of clarity as to whether you have to go back and get consent again when you're reusing some of the insights from version 1 onwards. So those clarities around scientific research and how to, but what's very important, again, to the commercial sector is the definition of scientific research has been clarified to include scientific research in a commercial setting, which means that when you're working in research and development on new product development and new product creation, and especially when we're looking in areas like new AI-driven solutions and all of that, some of those opportunities that apply to scientific research in a research university setting or in a healthcare and medical setting or in a biotech laboratory setting, some of those opportunities are available commercially as you develop the next generation of the products and services that you're developing to meet your customers' needs. Again, always with those balancing tests, and especially if you're going into
sensitive data areas.
Sensitive data.
Absolutely nailed down. You need to make sure that you are doing the right thing. It all comes back to the whole purpose of what was GDPR and now is DPDI is balancing the ethics of collection of data with the uses of that data and making sure that you are doing the right thing for your business or charity or whatever organisation it is, but also for the customer or the person who is going to be affected. And if there is going to be a serious implication on that person, then you obviously have to take more safeguards and make sure you're a bit more attuned to the risks.
And I think, we could all sit here and probably discuss DPDI for many hours. And Chris, you live and breathe it. Mark, as have you and I over the period. But what resources are out there for our customers and our marketeers that are invariably going to have legal people with views, hopefully not as strong as you experienced in Ireland, Mark. But what resources are available either from the DMA or that we've developed here at Paragon? What resources are out there?
I mean, certainly it's our role to provide resources to the industry. We have been working on a whole new suite of guidance around post-DPDI legislative responsibilities that extends from our best practice guides, our DMA code, right through to our learning products, all of which can include modules on your legal responsibilities and then how that applies. So, I would always advocate membership of the DMA, including the free legal help desk that members have access to, where if they have a question on how the legislation applies, or they have a question on a particular promotional marketing concept, or they have a question on terms and conditions, our legal help desk is there to answer those questions for members. And so we'd always advocate DMA membership as very important resources. And then obviously our members like Paragon in turn have access to sharing our knowledge alongside their own knowledge on their particular specific activity for their customers and onwards. So I think that's really important. The ICO, of course, will be producing updated guidance around the whole sector, and we will be developing a code of conduct for direct marketing for the ICO's approval, which will give some delegated responsibility for the implementation of data protection legislation to an industry monitoring body, which we hope will get our Data and Marketing Commission to be approved as. So that's further work that would give confidence that people are on the right track if they could join a co-regulatory environment where the investigations of potential breaches and complaints is done by industry experts as opposed to the ICO's investigative team, but all under delegated authority. So that will be quite important, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And so, Mark, how do we work with customers to really embrace DPDI and to really get under the skin of it?
So there's a consultative aspect to it. So, for example, if they are considering re-looking at some of their sort of privacy processes, the information they have on hold, and people doing some kind of review of the data that they have, if they're looking at their cookie policies and how they want to change those things, Paragon can offer consultancy if they want to start testing direct mail, where our doors are absolutely open, and that, get back into that and understanding the value of that from end to end, data sourcing and creative, getting the thing out the door,
postage
consultancy, getting the thing back in, building a website or building an augmented reality piece that allows them to get to engage with that customer and bridge them to the digital. It can be end to end. So we can help a customer with the practical implementation of what we're seeing here. But we're not legal experts. Heaven forbid, it's not our job. But we do have a very good idea, because we keep involved and because we are DMA members and we watch this stuff very carefully. We make sure that we're giving the best advice we can to our clients, and looking at it from a practical point of view, and also keeping the client on the straight and narrow, making sure that they are doing the right sorts of things.
Yeah, I think proactive has been real key. I think we've been having these conversations for a significant period of time about and trying to be proactive and understanding the strategies and how we adapt so that we don't end up with a post GDPR risk averse landscape. So, Chris, in conclusion, what are the next steps around DPDI, and where should our customers be looking next?
Yeah, it's been a long 3-year journey working on the legislation with the government, which we hope comes to an end fairly soon. The bill now is in the committee stage in the House of Lords, which is scheduled to start on March 20th and continue until May 1st. But we're really working hard and hopeful that we can get the bill through Parliament before the summer recess, and certainly before the next general election. And that's why we have our fingers crossed that there is no early spring general election on, say, May 2nd, which has been mooted, because that might be a little bit too early to complete the parliamentary passage.
So thank you both. We've had a lot of interesting discussions there about the change in legislation. And on that note, we have a number of assets available to download from the Paragon website. There is an infographic and a pocket guide to help navigate through the legislative changes. So thanks again to both of you. And with that, this has been Paragon Sounds.